Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's a Ukraine War Update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. It's a late one tonight. I've just got back from the cinema with my whānau, with the family, watching The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt. Good fun film, enjoyed that, and I really should be doing a mapping update, but I haven't had time to update the maps today. So I'll get that done tomorrow morning and get a mapping update done as soon as I can. So apologies for that. I did have this already laid out for you though. I did that before I left, and I need to purge myself of these nuggets before doing my next extra, which will be a look at the prognosis for Ukraine and how they can succeed and what success looks like and prevailing in the war. So we're going to start with the Latvian MEP Zdanoka, Tatjana Zdanoka, who's a long-serving MEP. If you remember back in January, late January this year, an investigation came out from the Insider, the Russian media outlet, and also working with a number of other media sources, looked at her and their investigation found that she had been connected to Russian intelligence, to the FSB, and had been handled effectively by the FSB in the European Parliament. It was all very controversial. And she had connections to two Irish MEPs, Clare Daly and Mick Wallace. And we're going to look at, mainly Clare Daly today, but we could look at another Vatnik suit by Pekka Kaluniemi concerning Mick Wallace, but we'll just concentrate on Clare Daly today. Michael Weiss, actually a Yahoo News journalist himself, has come out recently with more evidence to suggest Zdanoka has been handled by the FSB, with emails that date back years. New details have emerged as to how she was tasked by her FSB Fifth Service handlers, e.g. she sent a memo to the FSB about the situation in Kiev during Euromaidan, insights that may have accelerated Moscow's belligerent policies in Ukraine. So there's more information coming out concerning her. But anyway, she was linked to these two Irish MEPs who are pretty controversial. They have had some popularity due to their support of Palestine and their kind of anti-capitalistic, anti-establishment views that have seen them be pretty popular going back some years, but actually they're trailing in polls at the moment for re-election as MEP. So I don't know, and that'll be due to all these controversies that seem to be coming out. They appear to be somewhat connected to Russia and to China, and these are not the sorts of associations you would presently want. Now, going back to Zdanoka, as mentioned, these two, Mick Wallace, and Clare Daly, have accompanied her on trips to Russia. They then, at the time of the investigation that came out about Zdanoka, there was a piece in the Irish Independent that Clare Daly saying, "We broke up years ago," said Clare Daly on Latvian MEP being probed over Russian spy claims. The European Parliament has launched an investigation into Latvian MEP with links to Ireland's Clare Daly and Mick Wallace over allegations she has been a Russian spy for nearly 2 decades. Independent MEPs Ms Daly and Mr Wallace have taken part in a number of events with the Latvian parliamentarians, Zdanoka, in recent years. They voted the same way as her on several European Parliament votes related to Russia's invasion of Ukraine nearly 2 years ago. So they have been ones in the European Parliament voting against anything kind of pro-Ukraine, and it kind of tells you where their sympathies lie, and you would imagine there's someone scratching their back for that. On Monday, an independent Russian news outlet, The Insider, published allegations that Mr. Zdanoka began collaborating with Russia's FSB security services as far back as 2005, a year after she was first elected to the European Parliament. The independent MEP denies the claims. Asked to comment on her relationship with Ms. Zdanoka, Ms. Daly said to the Irish Independent via text, quote, "We broke up years ago. She never did the washing up." Mr. Wallace did not respond to queries. So that's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but they're trying to make little of that. Well, actually, more recently, she has been investigated herself, Clare Daly this is. So this is an article in the Times going back only 2 days, so Sunday. MEP Clare Daly helped the Russians contact the Omar bomber. So Daly gave details of Liam Campbell to known spy wanted for passing information to the Kremlin. Clare Daly, the independent Dublin MEP, gave a Russian spy contact details for a paramilitary held liable for the Omar bombing. So that's to do with the Northern Ireland troubles. And facing extradition on terrorism charges, the Sunday Times can reveal. Daly facilitated communication between Liam Campbell and Algirdas Palekis, a Russian agent who was prosecuted by the Lithuanian security services for passing information to the Kremlin, so on and so forth. So she appears to have rather a few contacts with the Russians. She votes in a way that aligns with the Russian desires and intentions, and so as far as I'm concerned, she's more than an unwitting useful idiot for the Russians. I think she's essentially more insidiously connected. Well, Pekka Kaluniemi did a Vatnik soup on her last January. So this is over a year before the investigation into Zdanoka came out. So it is going to be interesting to see if this kind of fits. So what Pekka said a year and a half ago, see if that fits in with what has subsequently happened. In today's Vatnik Soup, he said back then, we'll travel back to Ireland to get to know an Irish politician and an MEP, Clare Daly. She strongly aligns herself with another Irish MEP, Mick Wallace. Like Wallace, Daly spends most of her energy appeasing Russia and China and criticising the US. After several attempts, she was finally elected to Daly and I probably mispronounced that, in 2011 general election. In 2012, she was accused of misusing travel funds. In the same year, she refused to call for the resignation of her political ally, Mick Wallace. Wallace's company forgot to pay 2.1 million euros in VAT. After the incident, she resigned from the Socialist Party. After leaving, she requested a share of the old party's allowance so that she could fund her activities as an independent MP. In June 2013, so this is before she became an MEP, this is the Irish Parliament itself. In June 2013, after the G8 summit, she accused the Irish government, so this is when, this is before the invasion of Crimea and before Russia were kicked out of the G8, so it was G8 and now it's G7. She accused the Irish government of prostituting the country to the US and Obama. She also called Obama a hypocrite and a war criminal for wanting to supply weapons for the Syrian rebels. In 2019, Daly was elected as an MEP for the European Parliament. Soon after, Daly was accused of nepotism for hiring her former husband as her assistant, forbidden by the rules of the European Parliament. He had previously also employed Mick Wallace's son. Interesting. So quite a connection between the two. In September 2020, Daly's parliamentary assistant accused her of mistreatment and ironically having, quote, no respect for workers' rights. In April 2021, Daly and Wallace visited the HQ of Iran-backed militia group Popular Mobilization Forces. In June 2021, Daly and Wallace travelled to work as unofficial election monitors in Venezuelan parliamentary election and Ecuadorian general election without a mandate or permission from the EU. And when it comes to Russia, Daly's been busy. Daly and Wallace attempted to remove parts from the European Parliament's report on MH17. So that was the aircraft that went down with a number of Dutch passengers on board. It wasn't a Dutch airplane, no. And that's largely why the Netherlands are so vehemently supportive of Ukraine. But anyway, shot down by the Russians over Ukraine during the issues between Ukraine and Russia from 2014 onwards. She attended protests supporting Algirdas Palekis, who we just heard about, a politician who was spying for Russia in Lithuania. In January 2022, Claire said that the Russian troops on the Ukrainian border were, quote, clearly defensive. She also said, of course, we know how that went. She also said there was no evidence that Russia has any desire to invade Ukraine. Of course not. That didn't age well, did it? She has voted against pretty much every pro-Ukrainian vote in the European Parliament, including the declaration of Russia as a terrorist state. Her speeches are filled with whataboutism and accusations of US imperialism. She's also spouted the regular proxy war accusations. This is a really common approach. I've talked about this previously. You get a lot of people who, and possibly with some good justification, who are US imperialism, anti-capitalistic imperialism, and how that has been either used or has been the ends to a creeping sort of power play over creeping influence campaigns over the last 70 years, right? And you could look at South America and the clandestine operations in unseating democratically elected governments that didn't fit what the US at the time was kind of wanting to, as a government in any given country in South America. John Pilger's excellent War on Democracy is a documentary that looks closely at American influence operations in South America. So there are issues there, but it's so easy to take that. So if you are someone who is inclined towards that kind of position, then when you look at Ukraine against Russia, you are very much primed to be the sort of person who would take on the claims from Russia that it's the US and the EU and the IMF and the CIA that were behind the Euromaidan protests, and it was all about them and NATO, and Russia were just defending their interests rather than seeing that actually Russia sent little green men into the Donbass, and it was Russia that had been meddling in Ukrainian politics for long before any hint of influence from the West. So just it's a very one-tracked understanding of what's gone on. However, the point is that those kind of people are real, it's very fertile ground for people to take Russia's side in the conflict in Ukraine as it is now. As Kalioniemi finishes here, Daly's also been featured a lot on Chinese state-sponsored television, and she's been featured in more Chinese language news articles than any other Irish person, with Mick Wallace coming in close second. In these interviews, she often praises China and Chinese politics, and that is, I suppose it's probably a good time to might as well look at Mick Wallace as well. It's not a particularly long one, so let's do that. It was written around the same time, so this is going back to January last year, and there'll be more to add to both of these threads than is already here, but nonetheless, in today's Fact News Hub, I'll introduce an Irish politician and an MEP from Southern Ireland, Mick Wallace. He aligns himself strongly with another Irish MEP, Clare Daly, and his love for both Russia and China had been evident in his recent comments and appearances. His political career started at the Irish 2011 general election, and he was elected as an MEP in the 2019 European Parliament election, rather similar to Daly. Wallace falls to the general category of anti-imperialists, basically meaning anti-US and anti-NATO. So exactly what I was just talking about previously. Wallace's views also line up perfectly with folk from the fake news blog The Grey Zone. He supported Venezuela, China, Russia, Belarus and Syria during this period as an MEP, a member of the European Parliament. So if there's an authoritarian regime somewhere, it probably has Mick's support. He's called the Belarusian presidential candidate Svetlana, I'll try and get this right, Tikhonovskaya, is that? And it's even gone missing there, so let's get that back. Tikhonovskaya, a quote pawn of Western neoliberalism, and Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido as an quote unelected gobshite. In 2021, he visited the HQ of Popular Mobilization Forces, an Iraqi militia supported by Iran. He also blamed the Syrian volunteer organisation White Helmets, who have revealed several atrocities by the al-Assad troops in Syria, including bombings of hospitals, being corrupt and, quote, paid for by the US and UK to carry out regime change in Syria. He was also one of the few MEPs who voted against condemning Nicaragua's Daniel Ortega for his human rights violations. Wallace attempted to wipe out parts about the Russian involvement in the shooting down the MH17, which stirred up some emotions inside his MEP party. And that is obviously similar, as we mentioned, to Clare Daly as well. He's also criticised the sanctions imposed on Russian individuals by the US and the EU as being illegal and not complying to the UN Charter. Mick has attended protests supporting Algirdas Paleckis, as with Clare Daly, a Lithuanian politician who is convicted of spying on behalf of Russia. He's also voted against Russian aid packages, demands of Putin to withdraw Russia's troops from Ukraine, and against a resolution to declare Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. In Mick's defence, he's also called for peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Incidentally, like so many other Vatnik, this support started only after Russia's illegal annexation of Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk and Zaporizhia Oblast. Mick Wallace doesn't just love Russia, he also puts a lot of time and effort into supporting China's geopolitical goals. He has downplayed the Uyghur concentration camps and called the reports on them grossly exaggerated. In 2021, he stated that there is no solid evidence of the existence of these camps. Overwhelming evidence about the existence of these camps has been presented since 2017. In an interview by the Global Times, a Chinese state-run newspaper, he said that China, quote, takes better care of its people than the EU. Mick also in the Taiwan is part of the CCP gang. In other words, he advocates for China and Taiwan being one country and Taiwan being part of China. He's been featured the most in Chinese language news articles than any other Irish person. That was said of Clare Daly, so obviously both of them are up there. Wallace's company declared bankruptcy on December 2016 with debts of over 30 million euros. Mick seems to be very bad with money in general. In 2012, it emerged that his company had forgot to pay 2.1 million euros in taxes. Later on, he admitted fiddling his company's VAT returns on purpose. So, that's the sort of person he is. Bad financing seems to be an almost epidemic among pro-Russian actors. Mick was going to speak at the No to NATO, No to War event in February 2023 with the Grey Zone gang and other Vatniks, but the venue cancelled their booking. And that is that. So that's the sort of person that both of those MEPs are. And now we understand that Clare Daly and Mick Wallace will most likely have to say goodbye to their hefty salaries from the European Parliament. Both will probably still be paid by the Chinese Communist Party, though, says Kalyanami in reacting to Politico's article, Irish duo Daly and Wallace trailing in EU Parliament election poll. Though final result is difficult to predict, Irish MEPs, those two face an uphill battle for re-election, according to the latest poll. And he refers back to his Vatnik suits there. I just thought that would be a bit of context concerning those two. I mean, anyone that votes like that in the European Parliament, so obviously for Russia, it's just an automatic red flag, isn't it? Quite literally. Anyway, that's enough about them. We're going to move on to just go through this thread that I talked about this morning, which is a chap that has been to Kyiv. He's a senior Ukraine analyst from the Crisis Group, former correspondent based in Berlin and Moscow, author of a forthcoming book on why Russia invaded Ukraine. Having just returned from Kyiv, he says, I'd like to share some main takeaways from my meetings with political and military actors, people both supportive and critical of the Zelensky administration, as well as ordinary Ukrainians I met along the way. So most remarkable is Ukrainians' resilience and resilience and unity in the third year of a relentless, unprovoked attack by Russia. Although there is grumbling, Ukraine is a democracy. There's broad consensus for the need to keep fighting and awareness of the dire consequences of losing the war. People in Kyiv take constant air raid alarms as with sang-froid. They are confident in the air defences around the capital, but one old acquaintance said she thinks a second Russian attack on Kyiv is possible, something she wouldn't have said a year ago. It doesn't take long for people to express frustration with the government and voice the suspicion that someone must be profiting from the war. But even if Zelensky is losing popularity, Ukrainians understand that this is no time for elections. And that was a discussion that I focused on in a recent video on the topic of whether there should be elections in Ukraine. Under fire and partial occupation, Ukraine cannot hold new elections. Millions of people are displaced from their homes. There's no way to guarantee security. The main peril is that a divisive election campaign could tear apart the country from the inside. The Kremlin is spreading the idea that Zelensky is illegitimate, ridiculous considering Putin has just tricked his way into a fifth term. A fierce political opponent of Zelensky told me elections cannot be held until 3 months after a total ceasefire and the lifting of martial law. Surprisingly, there is little nervousness about the prospect of a second Trump presidency, given how disdainfully Trump treated Ukraine in 2019. So little nervousness about the prospect, says Lucien Kim. I find that naive, but many Ukrainians are fed up with the Biden administration's caution and think Trump could shake things up. I think that's a fascinating observation. I don't know how widespread that is because I've met other Ukrainians who would have a different opinion to that. But I just think that that's, out the frying pan and into the burning inferno there. I've said many times why I think, in fact, I've done a whole video on why Trump is bad for Ukraine. And it's about looking back into Trump's past and seeing his relationship with Ukraine, seeing what he said, the words he said, the words his advisors have said, what his position is, very obviously, what his children have also said. I mean, there's every indication it's not going to be good for Ukraine. And so for people to then go, he will be good for Ukraine, they have to contort their minds and the evidence so wildly that it's almost laughable. Never mind. Everyone in Kyiv is talking about Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's powerful chief of staff. At one dinner party, Yermak was ridiculed as the real first lady, among other things. Defenders of the presidency say Yermak is a scapegoat and the man who gets things done. I've mentioned a couple of times before that some people see him as the most important person in Ukraine. Anyway, there's friction between Zelensky's office and the State Department. US diplomats are seen as being stuck on conventional talking points, civil society, anti-corruption, when Ukraine is in an existential struggle. Not surprisingly, Yermak prefers going straight to Jake Sullivan. In the effort to step back into the global limelight, Zelensky is placing inflated hopes on the Swiss peace conference next month. Although his administration sees it as a way for Ukraine to regain agency, the conference most likely will end in big declarations and little deeds. The US is curbing Ukraine's expectations ahead of NATO's 75th anniversary summit in Washington. Ukrainians joke that NATO stands for no action, talk only. Pragmatic Ukrainians say a bilateral security agreement with the US is the best Ukraine can hope for in Biden's first term. And that's what they're going for. They're still in negotiations with the US, but they've had, 10 bilateral security agreements already, which is really good news. I heard grudging respect for Russia's ability to switch to a war footing and adapt to a changing battlefield. Some expressed frustration that Ukraine's economy had not been put on military rails. Others that red tape was hampering Ukrainians' amazing ability to self-organize. Putin killed the Russian language in Kyiv. It says here, sorry, it keeps flicking back. It's annoying. In 20 years of traveling there, I always heard more Russian on the street than Ukrainian. On this visit, I heard very little, especially among young Ukrainians. I promised to start learning Ukrainian. You guys let me be lazy. This is an interesting point and something's been brought up by a number of people I've spoken to personally, including Anastasia Paraskova, who is from Kharkiv. She's a Russian speaker from up there, but she says that more and more people are speaking Ukrainian. Even those with Russian language heritage are deciding to switch across to start learning Ukrainian as a statement of their identity, as a repudiation of the Russian invasion and the Russian intentions for Ukraine. And mobilization affects all Ukrainians. Everyone lives in the shadow of war. When a father, son, husband or friend could be called up. My best Ukrainian friend, he says, takes it fatalistically, even though he travels abroad for work and has had many chances to dodge the draft. Many people believe Ukraine has to muddle through to the start of next year when things have a chance of looking up. Quote, everything is going to be okay, my old Ukrainian acquaintance said. The question is, at what cost? So there's a few insights, obviously anecdotal, so take everything with a pinch of salt. But there are grumblings. I talked about there being grumblings within the population, within the armed forces, with regard to the administration and by extension Zelensky, and by extension the administration. That's going to be natural after 2 years of war and not prevailing. It's really tough running a country. It's really tough trying to make sure everything happens on the front lines while making sure everything happens behind the front lines in terms of continuing to operate as a function as a civil society. Next time we're going to look at Pekka Kallioniemi's vatnik suit for the Georgian politician and oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili. He's not the prime minister, but the guy that's behind the Georgian Dream Party. I think that'd be an interesting one. Now, I did record the rest of this video, and it was a long, sprawling talk about fascism that I'm going to save. I'll clip that off and save it for tomorrow for an extra there, because I think it made this individual video too long. But thank you for watching. Just a couple of little topics to get into tonight. Really appreciate your support. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon.